Hello again, Tom Mahon from Banetti, here to continue our series of educational videos on the asset management principles and the IBM Maximo products. This is our third session. Our first one we talked about the basics of asset management, and the second one we talked about the core Maximo product. This session we're going to talk about the industry solutions and add-ons that are available for Maximo, which is a very key part of the overall strategy. If you recall from our earlier discussion, when we looked at those guiding principles for the Maximo product line, that second bullet is where we're going to focus on this particular presentation. Deep industry-specific functionality supporting best practices. The Maximo offering management team consults with our customers and sets up advisory councils to get this type of deep experience and works with leaders in the markets that we address to understand where the product needs to go. So these are very customer-focused solutions. From a high level, what we're looking at is, in addition to Maximo, we can now do what we call industry solutions, transportation, nuclear, utilities, oil and gas, aviation, and civil infrastructure. And then we can also do add-ons, configuration management, health, safety, and environment, etc. The add-ons can be added to the core Maximo product directly or to the core Maximo product with the industry solution installed. That's why they're separated out. They're generic to work across the Maximo solutions, the core product and the industry solutions. Now, when we talk about industry solutions, we talked a little bit about this model earlier. The Maximo pillars of applications, the 6 major modules of Maximo, are still part of the product. They're all installed. The platform, those ribbons across the bottom of the screen, the configurability, the integrations, the reports, all of the new capabilities are added into the environment in the form of new applications to bring new functionality in that's not part of the core product, and expanded functionality within many of the core applications themselves. So once we do a transportation solution, we'll have a screen for assets that we've always had and a screen for assets that has additional data elements to support the transportation industry solution. And our users can be set up to operate in both environments, the core Maximo and the transportation, or one or the other. So your fleet operators will work within the transportation solution. The facility management team will stay within the core product, all within the Maximo platform. One of the keys is that line on the access rights. So when we have the multiple applications in the environment, we can decide which user constituencies, which user groups are allowed into which of the applications. And that gives us a lot of flexibility in where and how we deploy the solution. Let's take a look at some of the industry solutions and what we're trying to solve with that technology. In fleet, we have standard maintenance requirements. We need to do preventive and corrective maintenance and all of that. But we also have a lot of extended requirements that aren't applicable to facilities and manufacturing. Service recalls, check-in and check-out processes for a motor pool, warranties on replacement parts, even if they're not serialized, are very critical in the transportation industry. Tire management, licenses, insurance costs, all of that need to be captured and kept current. In many cases, certifications. Certain trucks, for example, require certification to be able to operate that type of a delivery vehicle. So there's additional capabilities that need to be added into Maximo. Motor pool management is one of them. The warranties, the vehicle repair coding system, the parts that come through the automotive and truck industries have a coding system that can tell you what vehicles it works on and where it works, and sometimes even the reference documentation for the manual on how to affect the repair. So being able to adopt one of the vehicle repair coding systems and put that into your system is critical for these large operators with hundreds or thousands of vehicles. Fuel management, clearly a major expense to be able to interface directly with the fuel purchasing process, have that show up to be able to monitor fuel consumption across the vehicles. And vehicle telemetry is very important for trucks. So we have the ability to ingest. Every time a vehicle fills up with gas, they can be set up to ingest information about the performance. It can now even be set up to be real-time connected through cellular connections as the vehicle is driving down the road, that the vehicle owner, and in many cases the manufacturer, Cummins for the engine for example, can get real-time information about the performance of their engines on the road. License and insurance tracking, new applications, campaigns, recalls that need to be implemented across a large fleet of vehicles that's distributed sometimes across the country. So Maximo Transportation brings these types of capabilities to the Maximo platform in the form of additional applications and modified core applications that really drive into what our customers need in the transportation space. Utilities is another major customer base for Maximo. The utilities industry solution is really focused more on what we call the transmission and distribution customer base, the T&D. Now, many utilities have two camps within their larger conglomerate. One is the generation and the other is transmission and distribution. And there's a bright line in between those two parts of the organization. So the T&D focus of our utilities industry solution is really focused on construction and replacement, a lot more emphasis on work crews instead of work individuals, significant requirements around the geographic distribution of assets. Some of our utilities customers have thousands of miles of lines, be pipelines or electric lines and things like that, that need to be managed and monitored, and being able to see that on a map is very critical. And we also get into some of the linear asset management where the asset may have capabilities and features that change over the distance of the asset, and the asset might be 100 miles long. So we need a key capability for the utility sector is one called compatible unit estimating, where we build out a configuration of a tower, for example, and then we build out a work plan that implements 75 of those towers. So we can take one plan, multiply it by 75, all the other associated factors go with it. We've got a project and we've got detailed tracking of the install and status of each of the individual towers. Meters are very critical to the utility industry, especially in T&D. Very robust activities over the last 10 years at least, if not more, to transition to electronic meter readings and not have to have people walking through your backyard to get your electric meter reading or gas meter reading. So to be able to manage all those meters, very important. Interfacing with GIS systems is very critical to be able to display the work on a map, to display the assets on a map, to look for where and how the maintenance is going to be performed most efficiently to reduce windshield time and things like that. Linear assets and crew management are also very critical. So Maximo has a utilities industry solution, and then from an add-on perspective, the spatial asset management and linear asset management are also available in the Maximo platform. The utilities industry solution includes the spatial asset management, and linear asset management is now included with the core Maximo solution. So these capabilities are available to address the requirements in the utility sector. When we move into the more regulated industry, now we're into the generation, in particular nuclear energy, other energy generation sites and what have you, and life sciences. What we end up with is much more heavily regulated processes where a change to a job plan, for example, will require extensive review and approval because it can affect the operation of a nuclear plant. Or it can affect the machine that's actually mixing up the quantity of medicines that are in pharmaceutical products. We need to have very tight control over exactly what's happening with that environment. Certification becomes very important. Inspections, documentation of all the work that's performed, the flow control process on job plans. We need to have an individual sign off and capture a sign off and capture measurements for each step of a process. So we need approvals on work plans, job plans, internal, sometimes external. That process needs to be controlled on work performance. It's a very regulated process internally. Complex approvals, a lot of changes are required. So workflows are critical, workflows that loop back and repeat a process when it gets refined and improved. Certification documentation is very important for many of our customers to be able to certify with 100% certainty that the prescribed maintenance was performed by a qualified technician on the schedule that's required, and to be able to produce that documentation to continue an authority to continue to operate a nuclear plant or a medical facility and things like that, a pharmaceutical. So we've got a Maximo nuclear, we've got Maximo for life sciences, Maximo calibration to keep track of all the tools and machines that need to be calibrated. All of these are capabilities that are added into the Maximo environment to address what customers in this market need. Another major customer base for Maximo is the oil and gas production and refinery. Here, we don't shift so much into the controlled processes or the regulated assets, but there's a tremendous amount of impact by the safety that's required in these environments, where a mistake can cause literally the explosion of an entire plant, which has happened at times, unfortunately. So that's a very, very heavy focus of what these industries are looking at. So incident tracking, to be able to identify if an incident happens, how that documentation is captured, anybody who's affected by that incident, and what process changes are going to be put in place to make sure that that incident doesn't happen again. So are we going to do education? Are we going to change job plans? Are we going to change the design of an environment? All that needs to be captured. We need to be able to do risk assessments and capture documentation on those risks and keep track of what the actual operations are within an environment. So a safety plan consists of a list of all of the hazards that have been identified, the precautions that need to be taken for each of those hazards, and many times what we call lockout tagout procedures. So in order to avoid electricity into an area where there might be fuel or other oil products, we need to be able to lock out the ability to turn the electricity back on until the maintenance is performed. Incident logging and investigation. Permit to work. Oftentimes the ability to go in and do work requires a permit and supervisory activities, a backup plan, a safety plan. All of those things may need to be in place before we put somebody into what we expect to be a hazardous situation. We need to educate the workforce on new processes and procedures, document that education, see that it's working. This type of industry also heavily uses our repairable spares, our roadable assets capability, and there's also a tremendous amount of opportunity for improvement in the supply chain. So the Maximo oil and gas industry solution is actually a pretty close duplicate of the Maximo health, safety, and environment add-on to bring all these additional safety capabilities, risk assessments, knowledge base, incident tracking and management, and work control, permitting, and some project management and compliance and audits and training capabilities into the Maximo environment to help companies continue to operate as safely as they possibly can. And finally, let's talk about the real heavy hitters, the very complex assets that transport people. This is really the focus when we talk about configuration management. When you have an aircraft, for example, or a passenger rail vehicle on a metropolitan rail system, it's very tightly regulated as to making sure that that transportation asset, the airplane or the rail car, has all of the right parts on it. They are certified to work correctly. They have been through the proper inspections. They've held up to the maintenance plans that are required. And all of that documentation needs to be in place real time so that the asset is considered acceptable to fly. We do that by doing a configuration management process. First, we develop a model for what the correct structure of the aircraft or rail car is, and all of the installed components, all of the rules for the minimum essential task list, all the rules on which serial numbers are acceptable and certified to work on that type of aircraft or that rail car. So, and then we go through and analyze the actual transactions on what was done for maintenance. Was the PM done on time? Is it a certified piece of equipment that got put in there? Was the technician who did the work certified to do that kind of work? We validate all of that against that original model, which defined all of those standards. If there's an issue, a red X comes up on the screen and says this asset is not ready to be used. If you've ever sat on an airplane waiting for a repair and the pilot announces we're just waiting on maintenance to sign off on the aircraft, what's happening is your maintenance technician is logging these transactions into their system, certifying that they're done correctly, and releasing the aircraft once it's passed its certification test, releasing that aircraft to the pilot to say it's now deemed safe to fly, and that's part of their process that they don't change just because you're late for a meeting somewhere. So that's how these processes work with configuration management. Now we can do configuration management on core Maximo. We still have our standard assets and item numbers and all of the work management capabilities. They're enhanced to a degree to reflect the models and the variants and the maintenance plans and things like that. But it's still the core Maximo. That's where most of our rail customers end up. We've also used it for buses. City buses, for example, are tracked using the configuration manager to make sure the right stuff is being done to those buses. We take it to an entirely new level in Maximo for aviation. The aviation not only makes Maximo more than twice as many applications, more than twice the functionality. It incorporates all of configuration management, transportation, service provider, scheduler, the build data interpreter, and more. It also renames a lot of the key fields on the screens. So instead of assets and item numbers, we have equipment and part numbers. We have aircraft tail numbers as a primary driver of our primary asset, and all sorts of other terminology throughout the product is tuned to be specific to the aviation industry standards that we see across the industry internationally. Key partners help put this capability together. Partners like Airbus and Rolls-Royce and others who actually use the product to do management of these types of large complex assets. Finally, I'd like to talk a little bit about the other add-ons. There's a few more that are kind of critical above and beyond the industry solutions. So interfacing with the ERP. We talked in the previous session about this to some degree, but I wanted to document it more thoroughly here. We know that our customers interface with their financial management system and their procurement systems. We design product to address those requirements and make it part of the core capabilities by creating the business objects in the integration framework that are commonly used to address the typical integration points. So we integrate with the general ledger so we can do transactions. We do item numbers, company IDs, storerooms for the GL transactions. We interface on the procurement line. We interface the inventory management. At times, the inventory is actually managed in an external system, not in Maximo. We can actually support that. And then the work performance and cost allocation. Now, to accelerate the deployment, what IBM has done over the years is develop out-of-box integrations for selected data points that we communicate with SAP, Oracle, and Workday. The SAP and Oracle ones have been around for over 20 years. The Workday is relatively new and is still evolving and growing. But they are there to help accelerate the adoption and implementation of our solutions going into our customers. We also talked earlier a little about Maximo Mobile. I'll bring it up again. That's a key add-on to the Maximo environment. It brings mobile native applications to the iPhone and Android platform and a Windows platform for your tablets. You can download the application, connect up over Wi-Fi or cellular, replicate data to the device, and be able to operate in a connected or disconnected mode. Many of our customers operate in locations that they simply do not have connectivity back to their Maximo server. Sometimes that's a remote physical location out in the middle of nowhere with a T&D line. Other times it's underground. It's in a mining operation. It's in a large building like a medical center that has all sorts of lead walls all over the place and minimal coverage. So the ability to go mobile can significantly affect performance of our workforce. The Maximo Scheduler, there's multiple levels of scheduler. Work planning, management, and resource allocation can be done at the core Maximo product, the Maximo Scheduler, or the Maximo Schedule Optimizer. The Optimizer is built on the IBM iLog technology, which can optimize many, many thousands of work orders against the resources available, and the materials and the tools and the services can all be rolled into a massive activity to figure out what's the most efficient way to get a project done in the least amount of time and hopefully at a reasonable cost. It takes a lot of job planning to do that. The Maximo Service Provider goes to another level for those that provide service for others and they want to use Maximo to track that service. Many times that service for someone else has a billing schedule associated with the work that's being performed. So we are able to create a service contract in Maximo that articulates what the parameters are of the contract that we have accepted from the company we're doing work for. That oftentimes has labor rates by skill level, for example. We then go do our Maximo work and capture our costs, actual costs of inventory, of people, of services, and of tool usage, for example. Those are all captured at actual cost. Then we can take and marry up the actual costs with the contract rates all the way to the point where we can generate an invoice. And then we can track that invoice all the way through to payment and be able to manage the services that we are providing for others from end to end. So very advanced capabilities there for people who are contracted to do work for the government or another large company, for example. Also within there, just a quick note, that's where we bring out service level agreements. SLAs are response contractual obligations that we have to report against at the end of the week or month. So that service call that came in about a plumbing problem on the 5th floor, we have 1 hour to respond, 3 hours to resolve. We need to be able to track when we responded and when we resolved it and measure our performance against those SLAs. Oftentimes that drives bonuses or penalties if you're not in compliance. So it's important to keep track of that information and be able to report it to your customer. So that's a summary of key elements of our industry solutions: transportation, nuclear, utilities, oil and gas, aviation, and civil infrastructure, and the add-ons that we commonly see our customers have a lot of interest in. There are other add-ons, there's additional capabilities, and a lot of deep dive functionality. These are the key things that are very important to our customers. So thank you for participating in our third session today, and we look forward to meeting up with you again on session number 4.